Under the 1987 Philippine Constitution, there are three branches of the government, and that is the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. The executive branch is composed of the president, the vice president, and the cabinet secretaries or the department secretary. The president has the power over all the department, bureaus, and offices. He has also the power to appoint all members of his or her cabinet, and also he acts as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Philippines. Vital executive powers of the president includes the power to appoint. Second is the executive control. Third is the budgetary power. Next is military power. Power to declare martial law. Sixth, he has the power to grant reprieves. And seventh, treaty-making power. Next is taxation power. And of course, the president has the veto power. From the revolutionary period up to present, there's a total of 5 Philippine Constitution. The first one is the Malolos Constitution, the 1899 Malolos Constitution. The second one is the 1935 Philippine Commonwealth Constitution. The third one is the 1943 Constitution, and the 1973 Constitution, and the 1987 Constitution up to present. From Philippine Revolution up to independence period, there's a total of 10 Philippine presidents. During the First Philippine Republic, the Philippine president is Emilio Aguinaldo, and during the Philippine Commonwealth, there are 2 presidents. They are Manuel L. Quezon and Sergio Osmeña, and during the Japanese Occupation Republic, the president is Jose P. Laurel, and during the independent period, there are 6 presidents, and they are Manuel A. Rojas, Elpidio R. Quirino, Ramon Magsaysay, Carlos P. Garcia, Diosdado P. Macapagal, and Ferdinand E. Marcos. Emilio Aguinaldo is the first Philippine president. He exemplified the personal style of a strong and dominant executive of Philippine politics. On June 12, 1898, he declared Philippine independence from Spain. And on January 21, 1899, he proclaimed the Malolos Constitution. The second president of Philippine Republic is President Manuel L. Quezon on year 1935 up to 1942. Quezon was elected president of the newly formulated Commonwealth on September 17, 1935. He was appointed resident commissioner for the Philippines, entitled to speak but not to vote in the U.S. House of Representatives. He played a major role in obtaining Congress passage of the Jones Act. He is well known in his fight against social justice for the poor and for the tenants. Quezon died in 1944 because of tuberculosis before full Philippine independence was established. The third Philippine president is Sergio Osmeña. His presidential term was from year 1944 up to 1946. He became the vice president during Quezon's administration. Osmeña has been described as a statesman, an able and veteran political leader, a quiet and formal person. He remained vice president during the Japanese occupation period, but he was defeated by Manuel Rojas, who became the first president of the Independent Republic of the Philippines. Commonwealth Government. The 1935 Constitution provided the legal basis of the Commonwealth Government, which was considered a transition government before the granting of the Philippine independence with American-inspired Constitution. During the Japanese occupation period, the Philippine president is Jose P. Laurel. His presidential term was between 14th October on year 1943 up to August 1945. He became Secretary of the Interior in 1923, elected Senator, Delegate, and Presiding Officer of the 1934 Constitutional Convention, appointed Secretary of Justice, Associate Justice, then Chief Justice of Supreme Court. The last president during the Commonwealth and the first president during the Independent Republic is Manuel A. Rojas. His presidential term was from year 1946 up to 1948. He made ample use of the treaty-making powers of the executive. He signed the executive agreement pertinent to the Bell Trade Act, also called as the Philippine Trade Act or Parity Act. On the bureaucracy, Rojas obtained legislation from Congress for the reorganization of the administrative departments. He also organized the Department of Foreign Affairs on the basis of Commonwealth Act 732 and issued Executive Order 18 that established the Foreign Service for the purpose of launching the Philippines in the international scene. But sadly, he died in 1948 before he could complete his 4-year term. The second president of the Independent Republic of the Philippines is Elpidio R. Quirino. His presidential term was from year 1948 up to 1953. President Quirino's administration faced a serious threat in the form of the communist-led Huk Balahap or Huk movement. 6 years as president were marked by notable post-war reconstruction, general economic gains, and increased economic aid from the United States. Quirino's administration was tainted by widespread graft and corruption. Ramon Magsaysay is best known for successfully defeating the communist-led Huk Balahap or Huk movement. He became the president from 1953 up to 1957. President Garcia pursued what he called the Filipino First policy, but he also moved into gradual decontrol in 1960. Diosdado P. Macapagal is the fifth president during the Independent Republic. He grew up in conditions of lack, but was able to succeed over adversity through determination and hard work. During his administration, he worked to suppress graft and corruption and to stimulate the Philippine economy. He placed the peso on the free currency exchange market, encouraged exports, passed the country's first land reform legislation, and sought to curb income tax evasion. Ferdinand E. Marcos became the president for 20 years in the Philippines. He was inaugurated as president on December 30, 1965. In 1969, he was re-elected, becoming the first Philippine president to serve a second term. During his first term as president, there was a progress in agriculture, industry, and education. In September 21, 1972, Marcos imposed martial law on the Philippines.
So martial law is based on the executive powers vested on the President by the 1935 Philippine Constitution, Article 7, Section 10, Paragraph 2. It is the extraordinary authority vested in the President by the Constitution, which in the case of the Philippines can be proclaimed in cases of invasion or rebellion or when public safety requires. On his Today's Revolution on Democracy, Marcos claimed Revolution of the Center to be an act of direct, nonviolent confrontation against the oligarchy of the Philippines. According also to him, Revolution of the Center is also a democratic revolution. It is a peaceful way to engage in deep and far-reaching changes in the country. He also claimed such political framework and regime to be constitutional because the executive powers vested in him by the Constitution includes the declaration of martial law and the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus as the situation warrants. On his notes on the New Society of the Philippines, he claimed that the martial law and the New Society would target the major threats of the Republic, namely the Communist Revolutionaries, Rightist Conspiracy, Muslim cessation, private armies and political warlords, rampant corruption, criminal elements, oligarchy, social injustice, foreign interventions. The rule of Marcos as president in the Philippines was interpreted. In a general view, accordingly, Marcos desired to perpetuate himself in power, but which was rendered impossible by the constitutional restriction of only 2 maximum terms for the presidential office. Accordingly to Skimmer and Shalom, they call this the Marcos personal crisis because the prohibition to extend his term meant the impending twilight of his political career. And the Brillantes labeled this perspective as the ruler's imperative to explain that Marcos' imposition of martial law aimed to circumvent the 1935 Constitution's provision barring him from remaining as president beyond 1973, and he called this as a triggering crisis.
Liberal democracy means free and honest elections leading to representation of the people by duly elected officials. The legislature is a deliberative body, allowing opposition for decision-making and law-making. Among expectations of a democratic political system are the dynamics of political parties and free expression of ideas through public opinion and media. Constitutional authoritarianism is the exercise of state powers by one or a few men on reasons of consent by the people and mandate of the Constitution. It is a term for a dictatorship rationalized as based on a constitution ratified by the people. It is the use of martial law and coercive powers of state provided in the constitution. On September 21, 1972, Ferdinand E. Marcos proclaimed martial law in the Philippines. And the day after, on September 22, 1972, he issued General Order Number 1. He suspended the legislature, banned political parties, stopped elections, seized and controlled the media, and caused the arrest of opposition's leaders and dissidents, suspected subversives, even criminals, and prohibited unlicensed and unauthorized use of guns. and he ruled the country by executive decrees, proclamation, and general orders, and exercised all powers and prerogatives as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos was then inaugurated as the first president of the Fourth Republic and 10th in the line of presidents of the Philippines, in a ceremony attended by 26 foreign dignitaries. In accord with the latest 1981 amendments, Marcos gave up the post of Prime Minister to Cesar Iverata, who in such capacity handled routine administrative matters and chaired the executive committee. In the context of liberal democracy, the constitutional and political setup of the new republic and the exercise of power, including political regression, human rights violation, and corruption, were all construed as dictatorship, but rationalized as constitutional authoritarianism.
On February 1986 marks the last year of Marcos' dictatorship. The Philippines has experienced a new phase in its political history. When Ferdinand E. Marcos unexpectedly called for presidential elections in February 1986, Corazon Aquino became the unified opposition's presidential candidate. Though she was officially reported to have lost the election to Marcos, Aquino and her supporters challenged the results, charging widespread voting fraud. High officials in the Philippine military soon publicly renounced Marcos' continued rule and proclaimed Aquino as the Philippines' rightful president. On February 25, 1986, both Aquino and Marcos were inaugurated as president by their respective supporters. But that same day, Marcos fled the country. The Constitution restored democracy by re-establishing direct elections of the President of the people, redefining the extent of President executive power, and emphasizing the public accountability of the President and other government officials. The 1987 Constitution, Executive Power and Redemocratization. The Freedom Constitution vested Corazon both the executive and law-making power. The new 1987 Constitution vests the specific powers and function of the executive upon the President of the Republic of the Philippines in a presidential, democratic, republican system of government. During Aquino's administration, she declared the sovereignty resides in the people, and also lifting Marcos' suspension of the privilege of writ of habeas corpus, and also declares the interim freedom constitution with 7 articles.
Presidential performance and dynamics of power that were tackled by Eleanor is some sort of assessment on the 4 presidents that range from the favorable, highlighting the strengths of their leaderships and styles and accomplishment for their firstly critical revealing of dynamics, politics where personal interest and struggling for power undetermined the norms of democratic political process. So for Corazon Aquino, her leadership is inspired and steered the rebuilding of democratic political institution. And not only that, during her presidency or ascendancy, she also had indisputably meditated the transition from the authoritarian rule to the restoration of the democratic institution and processes. And not only that, under the 1987 Constitution, Aquino also administration reinstituted the election and mechanisms for participation of different political parties. Not only for political parties, but also for the civil society and the electorate, and the orderly constitutional succession of political leadership. And to her credit, she also exercised the political will for political decentralization, or what we called as the devolution.
So the decision of Corazon Aquino to abide with the 6-year term without the election affirmed the course of democratization and constitutionalism in the Philippines. And lastly, the political system during Corazon Aquino was also open for the formation of political parties, where consequently peaceful presidential succession was affected. And for our former Fidel V. Ramos, he, under his ascendancy, focused on
political continuity, and more strongly improvement in the economy. And on during Joseph Estrada ascendancy on presidency, Estrada is considered as the centennial president during his time, and he organized his cabinet and prepared his program against poverty, criminality, and corruption. And for Macapagal Arroyo, Arroyo's turn to continue the democratization processes for the rest of Estrada's terms, and in contrast to the other presidents. So Arroyo succeeded herself also, and democratization and development had been pursued also by former President Macapagal Arroyo, by the four presidents by the way or decentralization of the executive and legislative relation. So in describing the legislative relations during the Aquino's presidency, it was pointed out also that the process of bargaining and compromise between these two branches of the government has a factor being the volatile multi-party system, the upper income class domination of the Congress, and shifting alliance of the members of the Congress. It was also like during this time, despite the lackness of President Cory Aquino on political party base, some landmark legislations pieces were passed by the Congress, and Ramos has relied on the Rainbow Coalition strategies spread by the Speaker of the House of the Representatives. And we have also here under this topic the judicial independence of the Philippines. And with here, it was highlighted that with President Aquino, Ramos, and Arroyo, the judiciary performed its function without the presidential interference, unlike during the Marcos authoritarian regime. So it was also highlighted in here that the Supreme Court was engaged in the review of Vice President Arroyo's succession to President Joseph Estrada on EDSA 2. So the Supreme Court traced the events that transpired using the published chronicles of the hour of EDSA 2. And not only that, we have also under this chapter the civilian supremacy over the military. In here, the provision of the president's civilian supremacy over the military was tested by the 7 coup attempt stage by the military groups during the President Aquino administration and the so-called Oakwood Mutiny on 2003 against President Gloria Arroyo. It was also during the civilian supremacy over the military, the exercise of military function, as what we all know on the history, and the power had been configured in the course of the Philippine independence of democracy. And it was also here that Aquino deals with the issues and charges of human rights violations against the military. Aquino also attempts here to address the grievances of the military against her policies towards communist insurgents and Muslim secessionists, and initiated the professionalization and modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines to resolve the internal organizational problem, including the low pay and inadequate benefits. Okay, executive direction, the bureaucracy, and the development. So it was here the president executive direction encompasses the bureaucracy of the central government, which is the hierarchy of the office, the public or civilian servant, the government-owned and controlled corporation for law, has its various rules in implementation, execution, and management and administration of the policies and laws. So it was also here that Aquino stood in line, so followed with the next presidents in confronting the presidents besetting the Philippine society, states, and the government. Overall, for this topic on the Philippine executive and democratization, the key message for this chapter is that the new democracy or restored democracy, in other terms, is deemed to have consolidated when its formal and informal rules of operation as embodied in the Constitution are widely understood and accepted, and political actors behave that it begins to hold.